Blog Talk Radio.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds.
Good evening, United Cardinals fans. This is Jess and I'm your host for Revenge of the Birds, our podcast and radio show. And we're back after a little bit of a hiatus as we previewed the last time we were on. We previewed training camp, and then a couple of days later, we had Larry Fitzgerald on as a brief guest to interview and talk about his offseason and the upcoming season. But we are back, and we've actually had a couple of football games that we have actually seen. Preseason football is in full effect, and the Arizona Cardinals are 2-0. Now, before we get going, this is Jess Root. I'm your host, and I will be joined here momentarily by Seth Cox from the site as well, and Ben will be joining us a little bit later as well. So sit back, relax. If you're listening, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us tonight. If you'd like to call in and give your reactions to the first couple of weeks of football, go give us a call, 646-478-3787. Again, 646-478-3787. Give us a call. Give us your take on what you've seen thus far in the first 2 weeks of preseason football. And we're going to bring Seth on live. Good evening, Seth. How are you doing?
Good, Jeff. How are you tonight?
Doing all right. How is it finally having real football instead of speculation and talk?
Oh, it's been a blast so far. Our first two games have been really interesting. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, we'll be talking about what we've seen for the first couple of weeks, what we expect to see over the next couple of weeks, as well as after next week we'll get our first roster trimming from 90 to 70 players, and then after that we're going to go from 70 to the final 53. With the coming as well waiver wire transactions that happen. Let's run down the games that we've had so far. Yesterday we had the game against the Dallas Cowboys, but before that, last Friday, the Arizona Cardinals kicked off their preseason schedule on the road in Green Bay at Lambeau Field. And what did they do? They shut out the Green Bay Packers 17-0. They started out the first team, got up there a couple of series. Had one really big play, Carson Palmer to Andre Roberts for the touchdown. And then after that, it was Drew Stanton that performed pretty well. We did see some missed field goals, but in the end they held Green Bay scoreless for that entire game. And then week 2, I guess it would be preseason week 3 after the Hall of Fame game is week 1, but the Cardinals' second preseason game yesterday is they held off the Dallas Cowboys 12-7, and we saw another 3 quarters of shutout football. And it wasn't until about 5 minutes into the final quarter that the Dallas Cowboys got on the board. So in the end, it was just over 109 football minutes of shutout football by the defense. And yes, that includes first team, second team, third team, guys that aren't going to be on any team at all. But we have some pretty good numbers. Carson Palmer looked sharp in the first game. He looked pretty sharp at the start of the Dallas game, and then when his final series had 3 really erratic thrown balls, looked like there were miscommunication on each of those parts. But here are kind of the highlights. In week 1, in the first game, we have Stephon Taylor carrying the ball for 20 carries for 64 yards. Not a great yards per average, but Drew Stanton. In fact, pretty much everyone quarterback-wise against the Packers looks pretty good. Drew Stanton led the way 8 of 14 for 107 yards and a touchdown, QB rated of 105.4. Carson Palmer, limited action, 4 of 6, 77 yards and a touchdown. QB rating of 149.3. Ryan Lindley was also pretty effective, 3 of 5 for 78 yards, QB rating of 104.2. Caleb Turbush even got in the game through a pair of passes, 1 of 2 for 8 yards. Second game, not so great for the quarterback numbers. They did not find the end zone. Drew Stanton, he was 10 of 20, 152 yards, and did get picked off, the Cardinals' first turnover. Carson Palmer, 7 of 15 for 66 yards, no score. Ryan Lindley came in for brief action, 4 of 6, 52 yards. Led a scoring drive, but it did not end in a touchdown. It was a field goal. He actually had the best QB rating of everybody, of all three of those quarterbacks, 93.8 for Lindley, 59.3 for Palmer, 54.6 for Stanton. Running game-wise, we had Richard Mendenhall, who looked a little rusty first couple of carries, but then ended up with 7 carries, 32 yards, a little over 4.5 yards per carry. And then Andre Ellington, he had one really good carry on coming late in the game with the 24 yards, but those were the only 24 yards he got. He had 1 carry for 24 yards. 9 carries later, he still had 24 yards. But the story of the has been the defenses in the first game. They forced 2 turnovers, and against Dallas, 6 turnovers. And so that's where we're at. The Cardinals are 2-0. They have 17-0 win. They've got a 12-7 win. Bruce Arians talked about, well, defense and special teams were fantastic, and the offense is a work in progress. Again, what you got? This is Jess Root from Revenge of the Birds. You're listening to Revenge of the Birds, our Arizona Cardinals podcast and radio show. On the line with me is Seth Cox. We're going to get him talking to us a little bit in a moment. But if you want to call in, give us a call at 646-478-3787, and we'll get you in on the line. You can talk to us what you think about the Cardinals so far and what they've done in this preseason. So, Seth, you tell us. We're going to talk about the players that are standing out. Looking at the first 2 games, who has stood out the most? What players have made the most gains, are flashing the most over the first 2 couple of games? Who do you pick out in particular, Seth?
So far for me, the standouts have been on defense, Tyrann Mathieu. Just the way he's been used all over the field. We talked about that after the draft. I've written about it. Just everything that he brings to the table, you have to love. And he was picked on a little bit in coverage, but that's going to happen. He's a shorter corner. He's gonna have to be the type of corner that doesn't allow any yards after catch, because he's going to give up catches to bigger guys, and that's what we saw yesterday. I think he only gave up 1 or 2 yards after the catches that he actually gave up, and that's what you want to see. And then, of course, I should say, other than the ball he gambled on and missed, but outside of that, on offense, I wouldn't say anybody's really stood out. Outside of maybe the guys fighting for that 4th wide receiver position, I thought Kerry Taylor really showed up yesterday after having to sit out week 1. Charles Hawkins and Jerron Brown have both played really well. But overall on offense, I think it's been a lot of everybody trying to get to know each other. They're on offense, you can't play downhill and fast like the defense has, and mistakes on offense are more costly than the mistakes that the Cardinals have had on defense, and we've seen that through the first couple games. So,
well, I'll go with you on the Tyrann Mathieu. In fact, he did get picked on quite a bit, and that was to be expected. They play him all over the field. He started at free safety, but when they got into nickel packages, because Javier Arenas was out as well with the finger injury, they slid him over to nickel corner, and they would bring in Curtis Taylor. The defensive secondary was actually a little bit banged up because Rashad Johnson, starting free safety, was out. Backup free safety, Jonathan Amaya, was out. Javier Arenas was out. And so what we were left seeing was not exactly what the defensive unit would look like. So we had Matthews starting at free safety. He slides over to nickel corner. And they picked on him a lot. He didn't give up a lot of yards after the catch. He did have 7 tackles. That led the team. Who stood out to me so far? I didn't think Matthews stood out yesterday so much. He definitely did in the Green Bay game. And I'm kind of a principal of the moment here. I was really impressed with Tony Jefferson there at safety, because now I was there for about the first few practices of training camp, and all through the off season I saw some workouts. There he was a guy that was really hyped, saying, they picked him up undrafted, but he really was one of the best safety prospects in the draft. He gambled to come in a year early and ended up not getting drafted at all. But he's been very forgettable up until yesterday. Now I was perhaps corrected on Twitter during the game yesterday when he made that first interception. Say, hey, that's the first time he's done anything memorable that he's done since the beginning of training camp, and I was corrected. He's made a couple of plays in practices I was not in attendance to. Off season, nothing special. First part of camp, nothing special. Really nothing that said, hey, this guy's got a future in the league, or we're gonna show up, he's gonna flash. He definitely flashed yesterday. 2 interceptions, 2 tackles for losses. He showed up, and Bruce Arians even said that on one of the interceptions, he disguised his coverage well and kind of fooled the quarterback into making the throw. Now, granted, we saw a player like that as well. In Blake Gideon a year ago, and he made a few plays in the preseason, and that was about it. I've also been really impressed with who have I been really impressed with defensively. There hasn't been. They've been played pretty well. I was actually really impressed with Gerard Powers, except for how he recovered from that basically getting beat pretty bad on that play, and then having the frame of mind to then strip the ball out and then force the fumble. I thought that was really good, and probably something that the Cardinals are going to bank on this year. And offensively, everyone likes the receivers that we've been talking about. You mentioned Jerron Brown. He showed up big time in week 1. Likewise, Kerry Taylor yesterday. Charles Hawkins making some plays. They've looked good. It was good to see Andre Ellington out there. But those, I've been pretty impressed with pretty much everyone I've seen. We got Seth actually working on a different line. Hopefully becoming a little bit clearer. You still there, Seth?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, and it is clearer. It's crystal clear now.
All right, awesome, man.
All right, I'll drop your phone line then. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So offensively, what have you liked seeing the best? Have you mentioned the receivers? Now, if you had to fill out the receiver roster, how would you do that so far, going 4, 5, 6? We know it's going to be Fitz, Floyd, Roberts. Who would you put in those final 3, and in what order?
So far right now, I would say number 4 is Kerry Taylor. I know he missed week 1, but I really like what he did in week 2. I thought he showed what he can do. He's a little bit of a different type of athlete than what they have. He's not as big and physical as Michael Floyd, and he's not the shifty guy that Andre Roberts is, but he's kind of in the middle of those two. 5 would actually be Charles Hawkins. I like his deep speed. I like the way that they've used him down the field. And then 6 would probably be Brown. I haven't seen much from anybody else. Nobody else has really impressed me thus far to the point where I would be like, oh, well, one of those 3 guys, I'd be comfortable letting them go. I think those 3 would be the best additions right now.
I think that's probably fair to say that those 3 are, if you had to look at a consensus, that those 3 are likely the ones that will be the 3 unless something happens in the last couple of weeks. Interesting is the way people talk of Kerry Taylor coming out of nowhere. People, he came out and kind of took the 4th spot. I kind of have to remember he was already listed as the 4th receiver on the depth chart. And he does have an interesting skill set. Now, his story is interesting in the fact that he has NFL bloodlines already. His dad played in the NFL, defensive back. His uncle was none other than the San Francisco 49er great, John Taylor. So he definitely knows his way around the league. The kid is very confident. It's kind of interesting how confident he is, talking to him, when he's bounced around 5 teams in a couple of years. But he's got an interesting skill set. He will contribute on special teams, and he knows all the receiver positions, which is kind of the one thing that he has. He's got decent speed, he's got decent size, and he's got pretty good hands. He didn't have the college career he had hoped he would have. But I would put Kerry Taylor at the number 4. I would probably say number 5 would have to be Jerron Brown, and I would probably put, I don't know, yes, Charles Hawkins has kind of shown up, a guy that you might still see a little bit under the radar, and especially when you look at that 6th position, they have to be a special teams guy. Charles Hawkins had the really boneheaded special teams move yesterday on the punt return when he didn't fair catch it. And you need to remember this: Bruce Arians said he was told to fair catch the ball, and he didn't, and he got clocked. And, of course, if they did, it benefit the Cardinals 15 yards. But those are the type of errors that they're not going to want to see. Robbie Toma might be a guy to keep an eye on the last couple of weeks. Little guy, catches everything, but he's going to be the type of player that looks, when you get special teams, he's the kind of special teams kind of scratch and claw guy that you might see looking out there. Looking at players that stood out, the receiver, how they're playing out. If you were to look at some of the position battles that we've looked at, maybe if you're looking Kason and Arenas, looking for number 3 on the depth chart for the cornerbacks or the tackle positions. What do you see playing out, or how would you say things are playing out so far, tackle-wise on both sides, and at the 3rd corner spot? Because I think pretty much I would personally think that Gerard Powers has a pretty firm hold on the number 2 slot at corner.
I would agree with that. And you look at just yesterday. I don't remember how much Kason even played with the first team. Whether that was as a dime guy or what. It sounded like Arenas has been actually getting most of the nickel snaps, talking about how they were going to move Matthew down to the nickel back spot when they go to that position, and they were going to bring in Curtis Taylor at safety. So I'm not sure what they've seen out of Kason right now. I don't know if that getting beat deep, which wasn't really that bad of coverage, so I have a hard time believing it's just one thing, but I don't know if they're worried about his ability to not get beat deep, but then of course Powers got beat deep, and Romo and Williams just weren't on the same page on that play. But I like Powers. I think he's a more well-rounded corner. He's just got to stay healthy. I think Kason provides the depth you want in the NFL. He allows you to do things that you couldn't do last year when Toller got injured, and then all of a sudden you're scrambling for who's going to be your next cornerback. And then for the tackles, I think it has to be, at this point, Levi Brown and Eric Winston. Massey was utterly dominant at times yesterday, and just looked utterly lost at other times, and it was really baffling to me. I don't know what's going on. If he's struggling with the concepts of what the defense is trying to do, I can't even speculate, to be honest with you, because I don't even know some of the things. He missed assignments. It looked like to me. Not, obviously not being in the meetings and things like that. I don't know what the exact assignments are, but it just looked like he gave up a lot of pressures that didn't need to be given up. And then you look at what Winston has done, and he's not spectacular. He's not, just stonewalling every rusher and just, opening up giant holes. But he is consistently in the right position. He's making the blocks, and he's giving Palmer time, and he looked better in the run game yesterday than he did in week 1. So I think right now it's got to be Winston. And then on the other side, Nate Potter just looks like he gained weight, but it wasn't any strength. I mean, yesterday when he got bull rushed, it just reminded me last year why I was just so hopeful that he could have spent the entire year on the practice squad and just lifted and gotten fatter and stronger, but instead he was forced to be the backup tackle all year and eventually start the last half of the year, and that's just not what you want from a guy like that. He, in my eyes, you drafted him to take a year on the practice squad, to groom him for a year or two, and then hope that he would be ready to make an impact after that. But right now, he's just been he hasn't looked good out there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of interesting looking at Potter. I remember I heard him on an interview recently, or he is an interesting type. It's one of those things that not everyone has that issue. I wish I had that issue. He can't put on weight really well. He has to work really, really hard to put on weight. So he has to constantly eat and constantly eat and constantly eat. And it just doesn't stick very well. And a little bit of fairness to him, the 2 sacks he gave up yesterday, the only 2 that the Cardinals gave up for the game, those 2 sacks, at least one of them, there was time to throw, but either the coverage was down. I didn't look at those plays yet, but whether there was a coverage type sack, but Stanton would have had time to get the ball away. It wasn't one of those lightning fast sacks that were like Kevin Cobb got hit with a few times last year. A little bit on the Massey thing is interesting, and it's a little bit of insight, I think, as to perhaps why he's struggling this year. Last year, he looked completely lost the first half of the season, and then somehow light went on and things turned around, and it turned around fairly quickly. And he told us in training camp that. I wish I had the quote. I wish I had the audio I could pull up right now. I didn't prep that quote at all. But it was the mental side of things. He admitted that when it came to the mental side of things and studying the playbook and studying film, that when it came to college and high school, it was something he didn't have to worry about. He was physically dominating people out there. And so he didn't have to really could rely on his physical talent. And so he really dug into the playbook, he really dug into film, and he was better prepared. Year 2, it's a new scheme and a new system. And in some ways, I would imagine it's a fairly complex one as what they like to run. And so we have Massey, a second-year player. What did he struggle at the beginning of last year? It was probably more the mental concepts. That's probably what's happening now, that physically he's there, but what Arians has said is the mental errors, and that comes from the familiarity with the playbook, the familiarity with the assignments and the calls, and I think that's probably it. It's Levi Brown. you kind of know what you get with Levi Brown now. We didn't realize how much we would appreciate him until last season when we went without him and saw that abject failure of the line. But already this preseason, he had a false start penalty against Green Bay. He had the holding penalty against Dallas, but he hasn't let the quarterback get hit. So he's kind of doing his job. So yeah, I think it's got to at this point. Arians hasn't said it's getting closer. You have to think it's going to be the veterans at the bookend positions.
Well, and you look at Levi and what you just talked about. He's been, he's been Levi basically, which is not exactly what you wanted to see when he came in this year. But again, it's better than what they had last year. And you look at it, and he hasn't missed a block, at least that I've noted, in run blocking. Now, he hasn't necessarily made great blocks, but he's been on his guy on most of the run plays I've charted to the left side. And then you look at it last year, and we couldn't say that. We couldn't say that, especially about Batiste, but you couldn't say that about Potter because Potter was constantly falling off guys, constantly getting pushed back. And that's one of the things that I've noticed, at least thus far in the running game, is that, hey, you know what, at least there's a push on that side, and it's a viable option to run to the left side of the line now, as opposed to last year when you just kind of said, well, we'll try to run to the right and see if that works, and then if not, we'll just not run the entire game. So,
if I recall, last year their tendency was to run up the middle, and that was really the only attempt that they did. That was the great majority of them. Then we go 2 seasons ago to 2011, they loved to run behind Levi. They really liked that, which is, you kind of expect that. That's what he does really well. And there was some time ago, and that kind of goes against what a lot of teams like to do. I know a lot of teams like to run to the right. That tends to have your better run blocking guy on the right side, and then you have the better pass protector on the left. But the Cardinals in 2011 were a much stronger and were pretty successful at running the ball to the left side, using Levi as the block there. If we move on a little bit, so we've got the tackle. Looks like the tackle position is kind of playing itself out as we expected. Cornerback position, kind of interesting on the Antoine Cason. I'd be interesting to see what happens in Week 3, and assuming we get some players healthy. Bruce Arians stated yesterday after the game that he intends on playing the starters into the third quarter. That way they can make halftime adjustments and come out and make adjustments in the second half. So it'll be sometime into the third quarter when the starters finally come out. So it'll be interesting to see what type of rotations we see there. With Tyrann Mathieu, something I noticed is I'm just a little too into this on my own. One thing I don't do well personally is able to chart assignments and how individual players do. But I like to pay attention to the type of sets that they're running, the formations. And I like charting whether they're running the 3-4, 3-3, running a 3-3 nickel, a 2-4 nickel, 1 back, 2 back, 1 tight end, 12 personnel, 11 personnel on offense. And what I noticed in training camp practices, the Cardinals ran a whole lot of dime. They used a lot now, which is interesting in looking back. 2010 under Billy Davis, there were a total of 5 plays all year when they ran actual nickel, when they had 5 defensive backs. Every time else that they went passing downs, they went to 6. They brought an extra corner and an extra safety. 2011. No, that was 2010. 2011 and 2012 were under Ray Horton. I don't know if I ever saw a dime out there. Practices, training camp, saw a lot of dime, a lot of 6 DB practice. But thus far in the first 2 weeks of the preseason, I haven't seen a single dime setup. It's only come in nickel, and it's very much the Bulls formations, at least their package formations, mirror a lot of what Ray Horton did, a lot of what the Pittsburgh Steelers do. When they bring in a nickel guy, when they bring in a nickel back, they take one of the defensive linemen out and go with a 2-man line and still go with the 4 linebackers. Now, every once in a while with the type of personnel they have, they've got Matt Shaughnessy, and I saw Alex Okafor do a little bit as he's one of the outside linebackers, but he would line up, or Shaughnessy does this as well, with his hands on the ground, giving you a little bit of a 3-3-5 look. And Mathieu got lots of looks on dime, and he got the look at nickel. I think I kind of lost my train of thought because I was talking about Cason in the beginning. Where am I going with this? Okay. I don't know anymore. But that was just an observation I had. What's interesting, I want to see what happens to the cornerback rotation. I'm assuming that Javier Arenas injury, being that's a finger injury, I'm assuming that he'll probably be good to go come next week. And then we can see where that rotation looks. Arenas has been really high on Arenas, very physical. He's a scrapper. He's gritty. He's going to give you everything he's got. Kind of a guy you wouldn't mind having in the nickel. And I know when they bring Cason in, they put him outside and they shift Powers to the inside. But yeah, when you mentioned he didn't play much, I realized that I don't remember much after the one play he got beat on. And then didn't see much of that after that. And they saw Powers. Then you saw Matthew going in as the nickel and leaving Powers on the outside, which might be interesting to see if Kayson has kind of lost his spot a little, and we'll see Powers on the outside of nickel and bringing in Arenas or Matthew to play in that nickel corner spot. We talked a little about the games. We talked about players, some of the position battles. Again, you're listening to Revenge of the Birds, our podcast, Arizona Cardinals podcast and radio show. If you want to call in, give us your thoughts. You can call in at 646-478-3787. Yes, that's 646-478-3787. Give us your thoughts. And we're talking Arizona Cardinals preseason football. Next, we're going to talk about players that are kind of fading, and we've already touched on one a little bit so far. Seth, for you, who is fading in your mind here in the preseason?
Well, outside of Ryan Williams, who's, I guess, not even there, it hasn't even been there to fade yet, you would have to, one of the guys, and I'll probably get killed for this, but one of the guys that has not impressed me at all is Darnell Dockett. Obviously, he's not in any concern about being cut or anything like that, but he just hasn't. I haven't seen what he talked about all offseason. He was on Twitter in interviews talking about this defense is for him, this defense is for him. He's going to be a wrecking ball. And granted, it's the preseason and it's 2 games. He's played probably 40 total snaps, but I haven't seen him get pressure one time. Now, I've seen him make plays in the run game, which have been good plays, but I've also seen him get run at and get kind of bowled over and moved. That's a concern. The other guy to me that has faded a little bit is Kayson. I thought coming in he was going to push Powers, or coming in, actually, I thought he had the edge to Powers for that number 2 corner spot opposite of Patrick Peterson. And then it comes out he's, kind of the third guy. And then all of a sudden, he's coming in and he's Javier Arenas is running with as the nickel guy and Tyrann Mathieu the dime guy. And it's like, well, where's Kayson at? One of our writers on Revenge of the Birds, Kent Hodder, is talking of, has said all along that he did not like that signing, and I didn't trust, or I didn't want to give Kayson, or I wanted to give Kayson the benefit of the doubt, but he's not necessarily living up to what we had hoped to see thus far. Those would be the 2 on defense. And then, of course, Ryan Williams on offense. I have, no idea what's going on with him right now.
Well, one thing that actually, I don't know if it's so much a thing that someone that's fading. Nobody is standing out at tight end at all. Rob Hausler has been talked up a lot. He's looked great in practice. He's looked really good in some of the practice. He wasn't yesterday. He saw 1 target, and he dropped a really easy ball in the flat, and then we didn't see much of it. But no one behind him is making any sort of plays. Jim Dre made a couple of plays, and I thought he would be I thought Jim Dre would be a much more of a player roster-wise. But he still sits behind Jeff King, behind Corey Sperry on the depth chart, and might actually be even behind Alex Gottlieb. But there isn't anybody in the tight ends that are doing anything other than DC Jefferson, who kind of made his debut, and it felt like he dropped 100 passes is what it felt like. And then we made the news that he was working with Larry Fitzgerald. He had a little better showing yesterday, but I wouldn't say that they're fading. No one is standing out at all at tight end. On the defensive side of the ball, fading, I would have to say that perhaps, yes, Antoine Kayson's is kind of fading a little bit, that he's getting kind of forgotten in the mix. I've been and probably like you, have been a little bit disappointed in the fact that we've seen really nothing from anybody off the edge. We saw 1 play from John Abraham, and we know what he can do, so I'm not worried about Abraham. If you get him into the game, depending how they use him, if he's going to be used in passing situations, he will get to the quarterback. I'm not worried about that. But we haven't seen anything from Sam Acho, and I'm going to touch on that. Sam Acho has become a forgotten man in this defense. He was projected to be a starter. Ray Horton called him brilliant. We saw him in his rookie season be a pretty disruptive player, and we didn't see that quite as much this last season. But in formations and when we see him in base packages, he has not been used as much. I mean, he's in base packages right now as one of the outside backers along with Lorenzo Alexander. But I've also seen him removed in place of Abraham, Shaughnessy. And so Sam Acho to me is one of those. I know he's a real popular player. He's faded a little bit in my eyes. That he hasn't really stood out at all. And interesting, you said that about Dockett. I haven't noticed anything that Dockett's done myself. I haven't noticed anything there. On offense, if we look at, you have to think Ryan Williams definitely is one of those guys. And Alphonso Smith, he got a lot of talk early. I'm not going to say that he's fading out of the picture, but he didn't really do anything. I would say that yesterday probably was a step backwards for Alphonso. What do you think?
With Fonzo, I think you have to look at it from the perspective that he's fighting to make the roster more than it is to get playing time. He's kind of the guy that you keep on your roster because he can do a lot of different things, whereas, let me phrase that differently. You keep him on your roster if you have a competent number 2 running back, because he's the type of running back that you can put in a pinch and you can give him 4 or 5 carries. You don't have to worry about him fumbling the ball. You don't have to worry about him doing anything stupid. You can trust him in pass protection. You can put him on any of the teams and he's gonna fight. Whereas other players, you can't necessarily do that. He's not a guy that he's not ever going to be a feature back. That's just my opinion of him. He's not. He doesn't have enough. He doesn't have good enough vision right now. He struggles, to make the correct bounces. He for whatever reason, despite his amazing speed, he's slow to the hole at times. So that's, I don't think he's ever going to be a feature back, but if he's your number 4 running back on your roster, I think you're okay. So I think that's kind of where he's transitioning to right now, is back to that number 4 spot. I know he ran as the number 2 running back yesterday, coming in after, not counting Taylor's reps at fullback, but coming in as, the number 2 back behind Richard. And I thought he played admirably. I thought he had the one really nice run. But overall, I think they're kind of transitioning him back to we're going to get you in on special teams, and if we need you to spell Richard for a down in a pass block situation, that's what we'll do. Interestingly enough, he was the guy that Palmer made the horrible throw to on that, what was it, 3rd or 4th and goal play, or 3rd and goal play that when Floyd and Fitzgerald were both wide open in the end zone. So, phasing him out probably is the right way to say it. I don't know if he's fading. I think it's just he's fading in the sense of usage, but I think it's more of the fact that that's what their plan was for him all along, is to be the 4th running back and a special teams ace type of guy.
Yeah, another guy that we kind of saw the warts show up, kind of like what we knew was going to happen. Jasper Brinkley looked pretty bad on that one play in coverage. Then the one where he had to change direction real quick. The guy made the catch, ran by him. Interestingly enough, he was bad in coverage, but he ended up down the field and recovered the fumble. Luckily, I don't think we're going to have to see Jasper Brinkley do much of that come the regular season. assuming that Carlos Dansby is healthy, because we're going to see in those passing downs, Reggie Walker is already in on those plays. It's going to be Walker and Dansby, and then come 4 games after the 4 games when Darrell Washington supposedly comes back, assuming there's no other discipline from the league. I would not be surprised if it is Dansby, Washington, or Washington Walker. So we're not going to have to break down Brinkley in coverage much. But let's move on. And we're talking. I'm Jess Root. I'm your host of Revenge of the Birds, our podcast and Arizona Cardinals radio show. I got Seth Cox on the line. If you want to call in and give your thoughts, go ahead and call in at 646-478-3787. And we've talked about the fall games. We talked about players that are standing out, the players that are sort of fading. Let's talk about what do you like so far? What do you like so far, Seth, that you've seen in the preseason?
Well, you have to like the pass blocking on the offensive line this far. I think I had them charted as giving up 2 pressures, and this is only the first team. I'm not really charting as much with the second team, but with the first team offensive line, I think I had 2 pressures for them yesterday, which is, granted, half of Dallas's starting defensive line wasn't here for the trip, but that's still impressive when you're talking about Levi Brown versus DeMarcus Ware. And I was in a conversation with my dad actually about this, and my dad said it perfectly. At that point, you'd rather Levi hold somebody than get Carson Palmer killed. And the how much they're going to be relying on Palmer this year, that's kind of got to be where fans' mentality is. If Levi's beat, just tackle the defensive player, take the 10 yards, and move on to the next play. But I've been actually very, surprised by how well the offensive line is blocked. Now, granted, they're going against vanilla defenses and things like that, but when you still talk about Clay Matthews and DeMarcus Ware and giving up 0 sacks, that, even if it is only, 25 combined snaps the first 2 games, that's something to at least build on. The other surprise or the other pleasant thing that I've seen is just how aggressive this defense is. That was one of the things Ray Horton was known for, was how aggressive his defensive were, how physical they were, and they've really taken that to the Bulls scheme. You have to really like the way that he's getting them into positions to make those plays. They're giving up big chunks of yardage, but they're recovering and they're making plays on the ball, and that's good to see. That's something that that we didn't see a lot of the previous years, and it might just be the personnel change, but I really like how aggressive the defense is playing.
Now, I've been really impressed. Now, granted, I'm going to go back. I need to go back and look on actually the game recorded and to look at Palmer's throws in the second game. I'm real excited about the fact that there's a quarterback that can actually make NFL throws. Yes, those last 3 throws look eerily bad like last year, but those were, from what I saw, my initial reaction from the press box up there was, oh, there's a communication error, because from what we had seen from Palmer, it was a case he expected the receiver to be at a different place or to look in a different spot. But early on, I love seeing a quarterback, and again, this is mainly because of how terrible it was last year. He can put balls in small windows. He hit Michael Floyd. I mean, he put it within, basically, there was one spot he could put it. There was about a foot window he could put it, and because the guy was draped on him, he can hit guys down the field. That intermediate deep route in the middle of the field with Fitz, it wasn't just the straight fly, but that's one thing Palmer hits really well. He can hit guys down the field. I like that. His decision making wasn't great in the red zone, but the fact that he gives us a passing threat, I've liked seeing. I like the pass blocking, like you said. what I really like is the mentality of the defense, the mentality that they're going to go after balls, that they're going to try and. It seemed to me that Ray Horton's defense was more about stopping you, and maybe that was just how things played out personnel-wise. But they wanted to create more turnovers last year, and they were pretty good at creating turnovers. I mean, Patrick Peters for the 7 interceptions, but this defense, you look at it, and you think they want to take the ball away from you. They don't just want to stop you; they want to get the ball away. And I just love that mentality. It just feels a little bit different than a season ago. Other than that, I've been pleased with the overall defensive back play on the whole, and some of the plays in the middle of the field. But mainly, I like what I'm seeing on the offensive line. I like what I'm seeing for Carson Palmer, and there's just the overall tenacity and the way they go about their business defensively, going after the ball. Concerns. What would you say are the concerns that you have? And I can probably guess one of them probably has to do with the pass rush. But what are you still quite concerned about thus far?
Outside of the pass rush, the one thing I'm concerned with is the timing in the red zone. It hasn't been. I don't know, and this is something that I kind of hypothesized as I rewatched the game last night. I'm wondering if these are planned reads and planned throws, splitting out Alphonso Smith and getting him a ball on a slant when you have Fitzgerald, Floyd, Roberts, and Hausler as the other forward receivers. And that's not to disparage Alphonso, but Brandon Carr versus Alphonso Smith means that their best cornerback is guarding, covering the fifth option on a 5 wide receiver set. That'd be my first thing. Is I want to know, obviously, if those are planned throws, and that's why he's making forced throws into coverage. You look at the one he threw to Floyd, in the Tampa 2, the place that's always open is that drag route right across the middle. And if you go back and look on the film, Larry Fitzgerald was wide open with nobody within probably 10 yards of him, and he took the deep pass, and that was I believe a second down throw, and then on the third down they didn't convert. But that's one of my biggest concerns. I was trying to go back and look at today some of the stats for Ben Roethlisberger in the red zone and Carson Palmer throughout his career. I didn't find anything that really was valuable right now, but that's one of the things that I kind of want to figure out is this a concern? Because I know from Bengals fans and Raiders fans that I've talked to about Palmer, they obviously don't have a lot of good things to say, but that was one of the things that they always talked about is how Palmer always makes his worst throw at the most inopportune time. And I think we saw that a little bit yesterday with those 2 passes in the red zone. So that's the one thing I would say I'm most concerned about outside of the lack of pass rush thus far.
And for me, it kind of goes both ways. I really like how the defense attacks the ball and wants to get their hands on balls and take balls away. However, to some extent, turnovers can be an awfully fortunate thing. It comes down to luck. Now, there is something to that. We've seen Charles Tillman, who is an expert at getting the ball out. I don't love the chunks of yardage that the team gave up. And Bruce Arians mentioned yesterday those explosive plays. If you compare the Arizona offense and the Dallas offense, the Arizona averaged, I think it was 4.9 yards per play offensively, and the Cowboys were 6.2. Yet it was the turnovers that made the difference, the 6 turnovers. I don't like how they were able to get chunk yardage, the same type of thing the Cardinals want to do offensively, get chunk yardage against the defense. Arians says that in the end it's turnovers and points that matter, but you can't always count on turnovers. And so I was a little bit concerned about, I hope this isn't what we see throughout the season, because I don't think we're going to get those fumbles and those interceptions every single time. Because at least on the play, I don't remember who was it that fumbled the ball, when Brinke got beat and then the catch and run, and it was the fumble. That I didn't see so much as something that the Cardinals defense did, is that was a poor ball handling on the Dallas Cowboys player. And you don't want to leave too much to luck, in my opinion, when it comes to defense. So I would much rather see them. I don't want them to get in the habit of giving up big plays and having to come up with interceptions or fumbles rather than the other way around. And I already have kind of concerns. The other concern I briefly went at is that the tight end position, that we're just getting nothing out of there. And Bruce Arians needs production of his tight end position. It's a very tight end-centric offense, at least formation-wise. He loves to run 12 personnel. Have two tight ends out there all the time. It gives you protection. It gives you protection, flexibility. It gives you the ability to have, if you've got a Rob Hausler, to spread them out. And while Hausler hasn't done much yet, preseason-wise, there just has been absolutely nothing positive from the other tight ends that I've seen. Nothing that makes you think, oh. And, well, there you go. This is exactly why Steve Keim said the other day that they're going to be scouring the waiver wire for tight end, among other defensive tackle and wide receiver. So those I would say are my biggest concerns. The chunks of yardage they gave up yesterday, and then at the tight end position, they're just getting nothing. Now,
yeah, well, and to kind of piggyback on what you said about the chunks of yardage, I actually sat down and looked at all of them. For the first team defense versus the first team quarterback of the other team, which they haven't seen a lot of, to be honest with you, the first team quarterbacks are 10 for 15 for 204 yards. Now, granted, there's no touchdowns and no interceptions, but that is basically a half's worth of throws in a conservative offense, 15 throws. That's a ton of yards. 204 yards is a lot of yards to give up. And, I'm in agreement with you. That is something that I'll be watching as we get closer and closer because, like you said, like we talked about in Green Bay, they're not going to go for it with those plays, on 3rd and 2 and 4th and 2. They're just not. That's not their normal personnel. I mean, you look at what Eddie Lacy did to that poor Rams team yesterday and how much he just ran people over. And then, having Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb back, they're not going to throw the ball. They're not going to have the route running errors that they had and that red zone opportunity. And then yesterday, like you said, the Dunbar fumble down around the goal line, that's just a fluke thing that doesn't happen. You give them a lot of credit for the Des Bryant thing, but how often does Des Bryant fumble? I mean, how often can you expect a guy like that to fumble the ball? I understand they were ripping and tearing at the ball, but that's just one of those things. That's a great job of creating the turnover, but you really don't want to be hoping that every time you give up a 30-yard catch and run that you're going to be able to strip the ball, because more times than not you're not going to be able to.
Who needs to show up next week at the Chargers? If you say, hey, after that, we do have cuts coming up after the San Diego game this weekend. So we have cuts coming. They're going to trim the roster. 20 players, or roughly 20 players, we're going to say goodbye. We're going to be down to 70. I think one player we definitely think really needs to do something is Ryan Williams. However, the fact that the Cardinals haven't brought anybody in I think they're going to be willing to work with him. That they're going to. He still has this year to show things. I don't think he's going to get cut. Obviously, Ryan Williams needs to show something. Who needs to show up? Somebody needs to show up at tight end. Somebody has to do something. I think somebody has to do something. Even I'm counting Hausler in that. Somebody has to do something, absolutely, against the Chargers. That's my number one player. Somebody there needs to do something. I think we're getting decent play out of the receivers. We're getting decent play at quarterback. We're getting decent play out of our running backs. Really, I don't have a lot of concerns offensively other than in the red zone. And a lot of that, I think, kinks. It's kinks. It's the preseason. I remember the 2009 preseason Kurt Warner looked bad. There was no timing, and it turned up when they won 10 games. Kurt Warner and that offense did not have any timing. It didn't really look really good. On the defensive side of the ball, I think you're going to have to look at the Tony Jefferson. If he needs to show up again, I think he's, even with the play yesterday, I still think he's probably on the outside looking in, and at best he'd probably make a practice squad. I don't think that he's going to get snatched up that quickly. I mean, no one was that excited to pick him up in the draft, and there's enough safety depth around the league. I don't think he's going to be terribly huge hot commodity on the market. So I think Tony Jefferson is going to have to step up again. I still think he's on the outside looking in because they need special teams play from a backup from like their number 4 safety, and that's what Jonathan Amaya is going to give you. And so I think he's still got to step up. What if you had to pick 2 or 3 players that they have to step up against the Chargers to make their case? Who would it be?
The first one I would talk about would be actually a different Jefferson, DC Jefferson. As you talked about, they need something out of their tight end position. I'm not going to be too concerned about Hausler yet because, quite frankly, if we're not going to push a panic button on Michael Floyd yet, I'm not going to push a panic button on Rob Hausler. Floyd does have the one catch in Green Bay, but he also had the one catch and fumble yesterday. So, but I want to see DC Jefferson do something because, like you said, the rest of the tight ends and even Hausler to this point are just so not anything you want to be counting on a week-to-week basis. And if Hausler continues to not produce, this is a huge concern because, like you said, Arians loves to use the tight ends in his offense. It's one of his favorite little toys to have on hand. So that's one thing. The next thing I want to see is Okafor more unleashed. I want to see him get some run with maybe the ones. I know that's asking a lot in the preseason, but if you're not going to rush Sam Acho and you're not going to, or if Sam Acho and Lorenzo Alexander aren't going to get any push out there, bring in Abraham and Okafor and see what those two can do. And as far as one more thing I would like to see both Andre Ellington and Stephon Taylor get a little bit of carries with the first team offensive line. Mendenhall had the one run for 15 yards, and then outside of that, I think he had 6 other runs for a total of 19 yards, which is still not bad. I mean, you're still hovering right around 4 yards per carry, but you want to see him healthy and ready to go week 1, and I really don't think 6 or 7 carries is going to make that huge of a difference. He looked to be Rashard Mendenhall. There was times where he would dance in the backfield and waiting for a hole. There would be times where he'd hit the hole and get through it and pick up good yardage. So that's basically the microcosm of his career. So I don't think getting him reps in game 3 of the preseason is necessarily the biggest thing. But I think Ellington and Stephon Taylor, they need to find out what these guys can do because, like you said, they kind of seem to be giving Ryan Williams the benefit of the doubt, and if they're going to continue to do that, then he's got to play. But if he's not going to make trips or be on the field or be in pads or anything like that, then you want to see somebody out there that can make a difference because we know of Mendenhall's injury history. We know of the tendonitis of his knee right now. So you want to see something from the rookies and maybe get a little bit of familiarity with the first team offensive line. But overall, I want to see Taylor and Ellington step up, and as well as Jefferson on the offense. And then I would like to see Okafor get a chance to rush the passer a little more.
Well, great. Well, we've got Okafor. We've got the tight ends with Jefferson. I've got the other Jefferson defensively. Ryan Williams, something out of the tight ends. We've got the concerns. We've talked to Cardinals fans. We've got another game coming up on Saturday night at University of Phoenix Stadium. No doubt there are still tickets remaining. No doubt. They called the Dallas Cowboys game a sellout. That was pretty funny looking at that stadium. But we'll be back again. This is Jess and Seth. We're going to sign off for our show. Thanks for listening. This is Revenge of the Birds, the Arizona Cardinals fan podcast and radio show, and we're signing out. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.